Well, I'm slightly confused, Andrew, on this. Keir Starmer last week with blaze and glory set out for the Middle East on a bit of a whistle-stop tour. Well, he went to Saudi Arabia at least, pressed the flesh and then came home again. Was anything achieved by that at all? Because now we have Donald Trump saying, no, this is how we're playing it. We didn't get the deal we wanted. J.D. Vance took it down to the wire. The Iranians wouldn't accept it. And now we're closing the Strait of Hormuz. That's it. What did Starmer achieve in all of this?
Well, I don't think Starmer achieved anything very much. The broader issue is really worrying, the embarrassment to this country by Starmer leading us. I find it all very depressing. He's useless, he's embarrassing, and he doesn't know what he's talking about, frankly.
Yes, and I think that last point is quite key to this, isn't it? I'd also add into that I don't think it's in his political DNA to be that engaged with something like this.
No, I don't think it is. He saw himself as a manager, I think, and when we need a leader, and he's not even managing well. As things get more and more difficult, he's seeming more and more absurd, frankly. I find it embarrassing for us. I find it embarrassing for him.
Yep.
And I'm frankly rather embarrassed for the country.
So off he goes to the Middle East. J.D. Vance, as Starmer leaves the region, J.D. Vance arrives for these sort of peace talks in Pakistan to try and attempt to get some kind of solution. It doesn't come to anything significantly, but enough for the Americans to say, we are closing the Strait of Hormuz. My confusion on this, Andrew, is simple, really. I thought the whole deal was to get the thing open.
I thought it was too. I'm not involved in any politics here. I thought it was done. Obviously, it needs to be thought through more carefully. I would have thought that the USA could deploy minesweepers and could clear the strait, helped perhaps by UK ships, but it isn't happening at the moment. And frankly, I just find the whole thing embarrassing. I find it embarrassing to be British. I find it embarrassing to be part of the UK government, not UK government, but part of the UK politics.
Yeah. Do you think Trump is onto something here, though? Because we know he's unconventional. He doesn't tick every box. He's not everybody's cup of tea and flavour of the month. But sometimes, you know, his big unconventional way of doing things does sort of work. Could this be the moment where there is some kind of victory for the rest of the world over Iran, if we look at it like that? He closes the strait. Iran have nothing to gain from it any longer because they can't, because he's closed it. Has Trump gone in the right direction here?
I think Trump is not entirely wrong, let's put it that way. He could have the straits closed. I think he'd open them up as well, but let's just get this straight. I understand it's 22 miles across, which is about the same size as the British Channel, I understand. So I think that could be open. But I don't have the details to hand to tell you what could happen. But I do think that we should support the United States as far as possible, because actually it's rather embarrassing not to.
Let's move on and talk about what is going on in Hungary right now. They've had a big election, and the man who's been there for 16 years is about to be booted out of office. Samara Gill, Talk Breakfast reporter, is with us. Afternoon, or morning, I should say, Samara. Nice to have you with us. Listen, I mean, this is big. It's significant for many reasons. It's significant for Russia. It's significant for the EU. It's significant for America. Arguably significant for general right-wing politics.
Yes, massively. I almost feel a little trepidatious bringing this sort of story to, Talk Breakfast show, because we are very Britain-centric in a good way. This is the country we should care about. But I penned a piece for an Australian newspaper over the weekend about this, and I think it is really interesting. Is this the beginning of the end for Trump-style politics in Europe? You know, is this going to have a ripple effect on potentially the popularity of someone like a Nigel Farage in our elections? And I think yes. You know, when you look at Viktor Orban, he was this right-wing Hungarian poster boy for populist nationalism in Europe. He had 16 years in power, and now he's gone. And it wasn't even close. It was a very decisive rejection of his policies. And the guy who ran against him, this guy called Peter Magyar, he positioned himself as this sort of political outsider. The reality of the matter is that he was actually within Orban's party and then sort of broke off. So it's really interesting to see this. You know, you had JD Vance coming and endorsing Orban very, very close to the election, and that actually seemed to have a negative effect on the results.
It is curious for all of those reasons and more, I guess. As you rightly say, this Peter Magyar, who's taken over or will be taking over, he's...
Much better pronunciation.
Well, I don't know if I got that right either. No, I've been looking at it all morning. I always take a leap and go, maybe this one will do. But him, the new Prime Minister of Hungary, as he will be, is far more pro-EU, less pally with Putin. But as you rightly say, he was part of Orban's inner circle, and he's still a centre-right politician. He's not some socialist that's taken over. It's not that kind of change.
No, exactly. I mean, Hungary is quite a conservative country. That goes back to its deep roots in all that. And I think it's really interesting because Orban, he was really useful for Putin because Putin would use Orban in order to divide Europe and make sure that Europe was not united against Russia. And I think we're going to see a real change in that. I think Peter Magyar didn't have much to kind of pick apart as a political opponent. So what Orban did was use Zelensky as the big issue within this election, you know, saying that Zelensky was going to come to his house, Zelensky was corrupt, why are we giving so much money to Ukraine, as the big dividing factor. And what we're seeing is actually people rejecting that notion and siding with the EU, at least in Hungary, wanting to get closer to that bloc and wanting to say no to basically this populism that Orban ran on for so long.
It's interesting that the EU absolutely hated Viktor Orban. I think they've withheld money and all sorts of things. But most fascinating to me, Samara, on this is that Orban never advocated to leave the EU. He didn't take that extra step for some reason.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. I don't think Hungary would ever want to leave the EU. I think it actually was one of those relationships where, unlike in Britain, the EU actually probably benefited a small nation like Hungary more than Hungary could take from it. Whereas with Britain, if you wanted to bring that into it, you know, it seemed like we were the ones funding the EU most of the time and holding it up and lifting it to its leverage. So I think Hungary always acknowledged that it needed that, but there was massive division. Now, let's see what this new prime minister can do and what he's capable of. He ran on anti-corruption, fixing public services, and being closer to the fight in Ukraine. So these are really simple policies that he was able to win on, which shows you potentially just how bad Orban's leadership was towards the end of his tenure. But I think the ripple effect will be serious. We can see how much Iran has then impacted Trump and then impacted all the politicians around Trump who endorsed him, and they're sort of light-footed about whether to go on his side, whether to not. I think it's going to be a really interesting effect from then on. Will we see this as the point that that type of populism dies?
It was interesting that, as you rightly say, a couple of weeks back they sent JD Vance over there. I stand to be corrected on this. I can't really think of a time when a vice president has been flown across the world to another country to prop up an election campaign for an existing... I mean, leaders will always be naturally in synergy with parties of similar thinking. But to go as far as sending the second most powerful person in the world to Hungary to advocate and endorse a candidate... It rather shows you how important Trump associates his kind of politics with the world, and clearly trying to make sure there's still a foothold of at least some Trumpian-type policies in Europe. I can only assume that's the reasoning.
That's exactly what it is. And, you know, in JD Vance's speech, which I watched, he spoke about how Orban was really, really beneficial within their negotiations to Ukraine because he understands the Russian perspective. Now, I mean, when you talk about that, there are leaked things to say that Orban said, "I'll be your little pet or your little duck, Putin," and it was quite a bit closer to Putin than, let's just say, JD Vance's quite light comments. But I think it was, from Trump's perspective, quite important to have someone like Orban in order to broker a deal between Ukraine and Russia. And he was quite pivotal in that. So you can kind of see from the US government's perspective why it might have been more beneficial to have Orban in. But you're right. I mean, we talk about JD Vance. He flew in there literally in between brokering a peace deal or trying to broker a peace deal for Iran. Flying into such an insignificant and small country. By the way, I mean, Hungarians, I support you and all that, but it's not exactly on the top of the list when you've got World War III on the precipice. It shows you just how pivotal this election was and just how damning this loss really is.
Like so many events in our country, when we read these stories, the horror is compounded by the thought that perhaps it didn't have to have happened if every industry, every element, every part of the establishment had played its part correctly. Let's speak with Peter Blexley, former Met police detective. Morning to you, Peter. We can go over forever the horror of this. It's choking to even revisit the story for so many obvious reasons. But as I just mentioned, it makes it so much worse when you start to delve into how this could have been prevented. Morning, Peter.
Yes, and the way you use the word compounded, I think, is so apposite. But please, just allow me briefly to remember Elsie, Alice and Bibi, rest their tiny souls. Of course, we will hear tales of lamentable, unexcusable times when this could and should have been prevented. Axel Rudabakana took a knife into school on 10 separate occasions. And yet, police, the PREVENT programme, there were 3 referrals to the PREVENT programme, mental health services, the parents, let's not forget the parents and their culpability, all of the aforementioned failed to stop him going out and butchering beautiful young children and injuring many more, including adults. It is absolutely appalling. And may I just highlight what really it's a failure to grip things that absolutely pollutes public services these days. So much of public service work is about ticking a box. So an employee can say, well, I've done what I needed to do. I've ticked that box. Rather than grip the situation, highlight the situation, be persistent, don't take no for an answer, and ensure that something gets done. Because in public service, so often, if you raise a problem, you are the problem. Whereas really, people that do take a grip on situations need to be treasured, appreciated, and very much listened to.
I would assume, and we will wait and see when this is phase 1 of this inquiry, when this report is published at midday. But I would imagine we are going to hear that there were enough red flags for authorities, social services, mental health, whoever, the police, to have suggested that this person, Rudy Cabana, was of such concern that he should have been either sectioned or arrested or kept away from the general public. That's usually what we hear. In defence, those institutions will say, well, if we thought that, we would have done it. We come across lots of people who are terrorised with mental health issues that don't ever do anything like this. We can't just lock people up because they look a bit iffy. I would imagine that's going to be the kind of response.
Well, it probably will. And I've no doubt we will hear that dreadful, awful, hollow phrase that we hear far too often these days: lessons have been learned. Well, it's way too late for that. But just to reiterate, if I may, after Rudabakana had been arrested and he was being assessed, this gives you an idea of how much liberal, woke fluffiness goes on amongst some of these services. Somebody who assessed Rudabakana called him, Axel is a boy with needs. Well, many people would say he needs a length of rope round his neck. But this is the kind of language that fails to grip situations. People should say this is a danger. The points I highlighted, 3 referrals to the PREVENT programme, stops with a knife on 10 occasions going into school. Anybody with a modicum of common sense and an ounce of experience would say, hang on, stop everybody here. We have got a major problem.
We've seen it with so many. I'm thinking of Baby P and stories such as that. Whilst it's a different story, the catastrophe is frighteningly similar in that the life of a little innocent young boy was snuffed out because of those that were charged with looking after him. And again, countless referrals to social services, all manner of issues around the neighbours worried and disturbed by the people that were looking after Baby P. And as you say, the same line came up. Lessons have been learned. I just don't think lessons are ever really learned. And I guess if you had to be slightly generous, and I don't like to be in cases such as this, but is it ever possible to learn a lesson? Because a mad person with bad intent will always walk among us.
I come straight back to what I said at the top of this piece about grip. There is a lack in our public services of gripping a situation. And I witnessed it firsthand only last year when I went patrolling with the police in Bedfordshire, and they would go to a call, go to an incident, and basically they just put a sticking plaster over it. That sticking plaster ticks a box, and then because they're so busy, they move on to the next call, and so it goes on, and so it goes on. But all that happened was 2 days later, we got called back to the same premises for a very similar incident, because public services are not taking the time to grip a situation and see it through to the nth degree. There's too much box ticking, there's too much backside covering, and there's a chronic lack of grip.
And there is another worrying component to this, of course, because if you look at the Valdo Calocane case in Nottingham, where we only in the last couple of weeks got this horrifying information that authorities were too scared to act with this man that went on to kill 3 people because they might be accused of being racist. So they didn't want to tackle a dangerous criminal because they thought there's too many people who are not white already here. One more. Many we're playing. We're in even deeper, disturbing territory, Peter Bleksley, than I thought.
You raise a brilliant point, which is absolutely sickening. Barnaby Webber, Grace O'Malley Kumar and Ian Coates should all be alive today, but they weren't because of the cowardice of people in public services. And I use that word again, grip. They didn't grip the situation because, as you brilliantly highlight, they were scared of being called racist. They've got blood on their hands, those people who fail to take control, to grip these situations. We need public services to be courageous, to do the right thing, to lock up dangerous people. Do not allow them to mingle amongst us because, quite frankly, Axel Rudabakana and Valdo Calocane are monsters. That's a fact. And they're both black. That's a fact. Do not let it cloud or interfere what needs to be done in future. Lock monsters like those up.
I mean, I think you would echo that. You've known Boris for many years as well. I mean, you know, likeable chap. You could have a drink with him, and he was good at telling you that life is going to be fantastic.
Yes, Boris was one of those remarkable people, politicians particularly, who could actually make you smile before he said a word.
Yes.
He could walk into a crowded room and everyone had a beam on their face. Everyone, whether they were supporters or even critics, would rush to shake his hand. That is a total opposite of Keir Starmer. I think that some of your callers this morning have summed him up as wooden and just a puppet. And that's all he is. I think that he is unique in the annals of British politics in being unpopular, and useless. I mean, that's the problem. Politically, he is incompetent. He doesn't know how to do the job of being a politician, let alone as the leader of the country. And I think people have really gone against him big time. On May the 7th, I think we're going to see a spectacular thumbs down for Keir Starmer personally.
Yeah, I think so too. I'm always intrigued when Boris Johnson was Mayor of London. You may remember that when he used to go over to America, as mayors do on these kind of trips, there was always a battle from the late shows to get him on as a guest, because he was such good material whenever he pitched up with David Letterman or whoever it happened to be. You don't really get that with many politicians. Politicians aren't usually on those kind of programmes, but you know, Boris had all of that. As you rightly say, Keir Starmer is bereft of quite literally all of those things. And what we see now with Mr. Starmer, Trevor, is this continual incursion into EU territory. He's never, you know, he was the man that opposed it, agitated against it, tried to get votes to stop it, etc. He was front and centre for Labour in all of that. He spent a long time denying it, and now I think that denial has gone, the veil has been removed, and Keir Starmer is, at least by instalments, trying to take us back into the EU, Trevor Kavanagh.
Yes, and I think that this is one of the key indicators of what is the hallmark of the Starmer leadership. It is deceit. I think this is not just an undemocratic move, which flies in the face of that referendum, which was a voice of democracy in action. It is sly, it's devious, and it's actually cowardly. He is not prepared to risk a vote in Parliament. He's not prepared to go to the country in a second referendum. He is sliding this in through Parliament in a way that it cannot be contested. And the only way that you can make any changes to it is if you can vote down a government which has a huge majority.
It's interesting that he's kind of now, I mentioned the mask slipping, he now seems to be almost bragging about this. He's not in denial anymore. The relationship with America has gone down the pan. This is safe territory for Keir Starmer. He feels comfortable in this particular skin. He loves the idea of the EU. The whole global leader thing feeds into everything he feels he performs better doing. It's no longer a guilty pleasure. This could well become, come 2029, an election policy to take this country back into Europe.
Yes, if he gets that far. I think True. Sarah, your caller a few moments ago, summed this up, I thought, very acutely, in that Keir Starmer knows he's finished. He knows Labour will not win a second term, and he's determined to do as much as he possibly can to assert what you might call his agenda, if it deserves such an elevated term, which is the destruction of everything that we hold dear in this country. And that includes our freedom and sovereignty as an independent nation state, as an ally of Europe, but not under its rule and under its thumb. But I think that that is what he will do. Whether he has the ability or the strength to actually suggest that this should be a policy for the next general election, I think that would be a huge risk. And also, I think we're going to see in the red wall seats in the looming local elections just how much anger there is still amongst voters in those areas about the betrayal of Brexit as we voted for it.
How damaging is this relationship with America, which, you know, he kind of gave it a go, Starmer, didn't he? There was a time, fairly early doors, when he seemed to be constantly on the phone to Donald Trump. Of course, there was his visit, Starmer's visit over there, the Oval Office, the invite from the King, and then, of course, the Trump visit. It all looked like Starmer was trying to do this kind of Blair Clinton stroke Blair Bush thing, and ideally in an ideal dream world, and he can only dream a Thatcher Reagan thing. He was giving it a go, and then of course lots of things started to go wrong, and you know, we now know where we are. Is that now irreversible? Is that the damage done? Is that Starmer saying, look, I dallied a little bit with doing that, but it's not going to work. It never will work under Donald Trump, so I'm going back to where I'm comfortable, not that fussed about the relationship with the United States. Do you think he's that far gone?
Well, I don't think he was ever there. I think that when you were talking about Tony Blair and his relationship with America and George Bush and the American political elite on both sides of the house in America. Yeah. I think that was sincere. There was a total lack of sincerity when it came to Keir Starmer and his relationship with Donald Trump, who I think from the very outset, the very moment that Donald Trump emerged on the political landscape, I think that Keir Starmer recoiled in loathing for him. I think the only reason that there was any relationship, even though it's now extinct, between the two of them is because Trump allowed it, because he's pro-British, or was until Starmer came along and made it clear that he was not an ally at all. So I don't think there was ever anything in the way of sincerity here. And I think that this is the true Keir Starmer emerging as someone who really hates the Americans, not the Americans as such, but the idea of America as the leader of the Western world. Mm. So that is, I think, beginning to show, and I think he's beginning to revel in it.
Lots of big stories around at the moment. The world of politics doesn't stop for anybody. Let's speak with Andrew Griffith, MP, Shadow Business Secretary. Andrew, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Lots to talk about here. Worth getting a word if we could. I mentioned fish and chips. I mean, I didn't know when I came into work this morning that fish and chips was going to be such a big subject, but it's absolutely sent our screens and our callers wild on this, namely because it's the Labour government telling us again what kids can and cannot eat at school. Not, oh, maybe we'll just limit fish and chips to once a week or once every 2 weeks, but they're banning them.
Well, I mean, this is a government that loves banning things. Fish and chips is a fantastic British food, never did me any harm. Obviously, our fishing industry is one of our great industries before Starmer handed over our fishing rights to Brussels for another 12 years as one of the first things that he did. Yeah. And, you know, governments, you'd think they would be fixing the NHS. You'd think they'd be dealing with some of the big global crises we've got and doing things to help with the cost of living. But no, they love just diving in, banning things, telling us all how to live our lives, how to do our jobs when they're not very good at doing theirs.
Yeah, a few people have mentioned that maybe it's actually a cost-cutting thing because the price of fish and chips are off the scale at the moment. So maybe it's financial rather than health.
Yeah, well, it's, you know, this government's got the economics of a Soviet tractor factory, hasn't it? I mean, they'll be driving up the costs of everything. You know, I've been talking to businesses. That's my job as business secretary. Oh, my goodness me. I mean, we've got April Armageddon. All of these new employment red tape has hit. They've driven up the cost of hiring anyone through national insurance. People's energy costs are through the roof. And look, I don't believe in a massive sort of state bailout. The truth is there isn't the money. Governments in the past have built up huge debts, but they could jolly well stop digging, stop piling on more red tape, stop jacking up people's business rates, stop piling costs on. That would help business, but it would help all of us because we all end up paying the price at the petrol pump or in our shopping basket.
I mean, on that point of business, we're in perilous times, of course, when it comes to the cost of living and particularly with the oil shortage. I mean, there should be no oil shortage because we literally have loads of it on our own doorstep. Ed Miliband is not enamoured by that. For some reason, he's given some bizarre autonomy on this because we all know Keir Starmer could make this decision about the North Sea. We know what's happening in Iran. That could get a whole lot worse before it gets better. The Strait is now officially closed by the Americans, so nothing's coming through anytime soon. What is the deal here with this North Sea thing? Because it should be rather simple. Even if you're Ed Miliband, you would look at this, who's probably sitting somewhere still dreaming of more panels and windmills and sort of evangelise this whole area. He left largely alone to do his thing. And no one's shouting at him saying, Ed, get your act together, mate. We've got oil. Let's make it happen.
It's complete nuts. Look, we've got this trillions of barrels of oil and gas under our feet. Importing that from anyone else will simply be less secure, and actually it will cost more in terms of the financial price and even the cost of those emissions, because you've also got to pay more to bring it here. So it is properly nuts. Now, Parliament's been away for a couple of weeks. It's back today. Starmer should be putting his hand on the back of Ed Miliband saying, get yourself down to Parliament, announce that we'll be licensing Jackdaw and Rosebank, two of these big opportunity fields, relieving the burden of tax on exploration so that all of these great companies, energy companies, two of which are fantastically successful British companies, BP and Shell, are actually devoting their time and energy helping British security rather than going and building businesses for other people around the world. You know what? The same for our food. Why are we not focusing more on self-sufficiency of food instead of piling up more and more solar farms on good British farmland?
And of course, we have more bureaucracy in the last couple of years for small businesses and more taxation as well. I mean, are the Conservatives going to reverse all of this if you happen to win the election in 2029?
Well, I can be categoric because we've already announced that we are going to reverse almost all of the measures in Labour's job-destroying unemployment bill. So removing all of that red tape that they've piled on businesses that is costing people's jobs. We'll go further. We will reform business rates to take 250,000 businesses out of business rates entirely, and I hope we can go further over time. And the reason this is credible, because I'm fed up as a business person of politicians just saying this, is we uniquely are willing to make the tough choices on welfare. We have been very clear. We're on the side of the high street, not on the side of Benefit Street. We will reform the way that people get sign off to be on benefits for life. We opposed the removal of the second child cap. You know, if you're an ordinary employee at work, you don't get a pay rise just because you've had another child. Why should that be true of the welfare and benefit system? We don't support all this idea of piling on more and more discounts. So if you are a hard-working family trying to visit the Tower of London or another visit attraction, you have to pay full freight, and somebody on benefits gets a very discounted option. All of this has to change, and the changed Conservative Party is deadly serious about doing this. Why? Because we need to put money into the armed forces. We need to remove the yoke, the burden on small businesses that is crushing them, and we need to reduce the cost of living, a lot of which is made up of the cost of taxes and red tape.
You won't have to worry about red tape, of course, because that will be the EU's problem, it seems, Andrew, because Keir Starmer is by instalments taking us back into certainly business and trading arrangements, and new legislation, once a trade deal has been struck, will mean that any further rules and regs will not be voted on by you guys. They can just rubber stamp it. What do you say to that?
Well, anyone, whatever your view, should be the believer that Parliament is the body that should make these decisions. We shouldn't be outsourcing them to Brussels, the low or slow growth EU. We're an agile economy. We can once again be one of the most prosperous countries on the planet, but we need to be setting our own rules. No one says to Canada, the thing you need to do, even though you trade a lot with the United States, share a land border, share a language, is take powers away from the Canadian Parliament and hand them over to US Congress. That is exactly what Starmer is proposing for the British Parliament. I think it's wrong. Conservatives think it's wrong. We will reverse that. We do not support that.
Do you sense, and this may sound like a stupid question, Andrew, that Mr. Starmer is instinctively and purposely taking us back into the EU in all but name? Is that the route plan for this government?
In a word, because then I have to go, yes, he is. I mean, this is someone who tried to overturn the referendum, the view of the British people. He's never been happy with British sovereignty on these matters. He's not to be trusted. The day cannot come quickly enough when we get rid of this wretched government.
Prevent, I know you've been very defensive of Prevent. They are mentioned multiple times in this report. I'm not talking about in this particular occasion.
I've never been defensive about Prevent. I've been very direct about Prevent, and I have recommended repeatedly that changes should be made to Prevent.
OK. Were any of those changes that you've recommended? I mean, you certainly have reviewed Prevent. You know all about Prevent. Is anything that you've said should happen, has it happened?
An awful lot has happened since I first reviewed Prevent in 2011. But the terrorism threat has changed in its character as well. Prevent has not always kept up with that. Sir Adrian Fulford produced an excellent report, very direct, very straightforward. Everything he has said should be followed. And I'm delighted that the Prime Minister responded almost immediately to the report saying, obviously, they're going to follow the recommendations made.
It didn't respond with any particular anger or annoyance at what had happened, did he? I know he's the Prime Minister. He's not meant to start.
He's the Prime Minister.
Jumping up and down.
He responded very positively and effectively.
Well, he didn't, did he? He really didn't.
Well,
he read out of a press release that somebody had written for him saying, you know, lessons will be learned. We hear it every time.
Well, if he didn't say lessons would be learned, you'd be saying, why didn't he say lessons would be learned?
Because everybody says lessons will be learned, and Prevent have come under the microscope on more than one occasion for this very or versions of that same mantra. It doesn't come under our category. It's not something we could deal with. We thought everything was okay. I mean, Prevent, 3 times missed the boat on this one.
And that is very disappointing indeed. But there are some background reasons for that. As Lord Anderson, a very distinguished colleague of mine, said yesterday, the way in which people commit terrorism acts has changed. When I started as independent reviewer of terrorism legislation in the early 2000s, we were dealing with very known, very organised actors and organisations. Now we have people like the Southport perpetrator who become radicalised at home and do not fall into any very well-defined religious or political belief. Prevent has to adjust so that it takes those people into account. And, you know, if you look across the piece, there are many, many cases, many highlighted by an excellent organisation called 100 Families, in which very seriously mentally ill people go out and kill or damage other people and cause great danger to society. And we must ensure that we learn the lessons from the Fulford report, which is one of the best pieces of work that's ever been done in this area.
Prevent was never said, as far as I know. You can correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I mean, yes, of course, the way, you know, lone attackers and those that are not linked to a specific ideology is relatively new. But I mean, we have to be careful how we use the word relatively. It didn't start last week, did it? We've known for some time that terrorism can come in many forms, and this is one of them. How could Prevent be so behind the curve on this?
Well, it's partly an issue about the organisation of Prevent. My own view is that Prevent should be organised on a much more national basis so that the same standards apply all over the country. Also, the way in which referrals to Prevent are dealt with should be standardised so that when a Prevent committee, a panel, meets to decide whether someone should be admitted into Prevent programmes, everyone who's making that decision should see all the material, which doesn't happen at the moment, and that, of course, is absurd. And I think that the changes that are needed are simple, but crucially important. Another very important point I'd like to make is about the sharing of information. For years and years and years, it's been difficult to persuade mental health services, housing, education, and parents to share information so that we can know whether somebody represents a danger to the public. That obviously has to stop. We now have to have a joined-up system.
But that is the same. You know, we can go back. I know this isn't terrorism in the conventional sense, but you can go back to Baby P, Victoria Clumbier, these kind of cases where, you know, people said the same thing. You know, that agency wasn't talking to that agency. The school didn't talk to social services. Social services didn't talk to clinicians. I mean, how much longer, Alex, does this have to go on for?
Well,
kids are dying.
You're making an excellent point, and I did a report as long ago as when Michael Gove was Secretary of State for Education, what was called the Edlington case, and made the point that these organisations all have to talk to one another. That has not yet happened, and it's time for that reluctance to share information to stop, and that's why the way in which you're dealing with this is so valuable, I think.
Is it? I mean, we appear to be in sort of I know this is a cliche, a bit of a box-ticking world where one agency fills out a form, or you've got to get a D182 form for that, or whatever it's called. I'll fill it out, I pass it on to my senior, they fill out the next bit, then they stick it in a file and it stays there. Another agency is doing their box-ticking, and everybody sat around and had meetings in the case of Southport, but nobody wanted to take responsibility for it. So there was no...
It may be
no
perversely...
point of gravity there.
It may perversely be because they do not fill in enough forms in cases like this. Because if you had asked each of the people who came into contact with the perpetrator, from the parents to the police, via the medical services and so on, has this person ever done something that is potentially dangerous to the public? If that question had been asked, every one of them, if they were telling the truth, would have had to tick yes. But they didn't share that information. So we need a better system in which there is linkage between them, whether they do it by forms or face-to-face. Because by and large, Prevent does exactly what it says on the tin. It prevents people successfully from becoming terrorists. But there are holes in the sieve.
Well, it didn't prevent this guy, did it?
No, there are holes in the sieve, and we need to
So it doesn't work?
It does work in a very large number of cases. Unfortunately, there have been a few cases in which it failed to work very badly. That's the issue that Fulford is dealing with.
I get that, but do we have to accept that Prevent just can't prevent all attacks, even if someone is on the radar 3 times? Not once, 3 times.
Well, the answer to your question
That's
is,
failure,
of course, we
right?
don't have to.
That's failure.
Of course, it's
Prevent
Of
failed.
course it is. Of course it did in this instance, but you have to remember that these are very complex systems. You know, the police arrest innocent people quite often, but that doesn't mean we stop the police having the power of arrest. And they release people who are very guilty, but that doesn't mean we abolish the police. Prevent is in exactly that same very complex field, but we have to get it right for the future. And Sir Adrian Fulford has made very clear the sorts of things that should be done. And I and my predecessors as independent reviewers of terrorism legislation support very much his report and the government's reaction to it.
Listen, I mean, let's start on this. I don't even know where to begin when we look at this phase 1 of the Southport inquiry. Whatever way you try to look into this story, it is so deeply disturbing, namely that 3 young kids died and lost their lives in the most horrific way. It was witnessed by other young kids, some kids trying to protect, 6-year-olds trying to protect 6-year-olds. And then there were adults in the room. Many of these other people were injured. Some have life-changing injuries, but all will be affected for the rest of their life as well. And of course, what compounds it, Sarah, is the fact that this could have been stopped.
Yeah, it's horrific, isn't it? Look, I'm a mum of 2 boys. I can't imagine how that must feel for those parents. But this has 2 aspects to it. Firstly, we have the parents of the perpetrator, and of course, they knew, they did nothing. Well, what loyalty have they got to the people of this country? They were immigrants. We've let them in. We've let them live here. And look how they've repaid us. And I think any parental duty, of course, in your heart, you want to do everything to protect your children. But if you have a child that is harbouring knives, ordering knives on the internet, that has effectively been shut in their bedroom for 2 years, you know you've got a problem. And of course, they should have flagged it to the authorities.
And there were many opportunities for them to have called the police and said, look, our son he's out of control. He's got an armoury up there in the bedroom.
Yeah.
I was just going to say, Sarah, just to compound that, the week before the attack, he was off to try and do a different attack, and he was eventually stopped by his dad. So the second time it happened, where they also knew he ordered a cab and took out a knife from the house, they never once called the police.
Yeah, and of course the second aspect is the failing of the authorities. When are we going to stop hiding behind this racism card? People have to feel that they are able to speak out. It is not racist to call out a child that has machetes and knives and is clearly, a head teacher is clearly they know the children better than anyone, the teachers, and is afraid to. Well, she raised it, didn't she?
She raised it. This was Joanne. This was Joanne Hodson, head teacher of the school. It was a specialist school that he attended. She described having a visceral sense of dread that he would do something, saying she felt every day it was building and building and building. These are her words, and that the school was left holding the baby as other agencies simply peeled away when she sought help. So there was no help for her. When she did raise the issue about what a risk they felt he was, firstly she was told not to use the word sinister. They crossed that out and said the word sinister was wrong and it had to be replaced with the word inappropriate after professional views were submitted by CAMS. She was challenged quite heavily and told no child should ever be described as sinister, which in itself is bizarre. But perhaps the most disturbing part is when she was told that she couldn't sum up the risk of this person because her attitude towards risk around him was because she perceived him as a black boy with a knife. I mean, whoever told her that should be currently serving about 30 years in jail, frankly, Sarah.
And this is the point, isn't it? That it doesn't matter what rhetoric Starmer comes out with following this, and he spoke yesterday in Parliament. The point is, people are not held to account. Who overruled that head teacher? What is going to happen to that person? Because they have, the lives of 3 young children on their conscience, all because they didn't want to be called racist. Yeah. This is absolutely mad. This country now is hiding behind this racist card. People are afraid to speak out and look at the consequences of inaction.
I want to know who the person was that told her that she can't say that. And I wonder whether, I don't know whether phase 2 of this inquiry will go into that. The smart money suggests, Sarah, we'll probably never find the individual. It was probably an agency that collectively put this letter together, or however they imparted their disquiet towards the teacher. I don't know. But the idea that anyone thought that was a correct and appropriate way to respond to a head teacher who's at the coalface of these problems, who's there every day. She's looking at Rudy Cabana, constantly thinking that the threat is building and building and building. There is a huge risk here. And she's told essentially to shut up and keep her opinions to herself, because if you point out that this black kid is, he likes knives, that's a stereotype, and therefore she's essentially been accused of racism.
Yeah, and you know what? Some heads must roll, because even if it ends up being the head of the department that wrote the letter, it doesn't matter. The buck has got to stop somewhere, and until people are held to account. And I mean, I think that should be a criminal charge against that person, not just a dismissal. But until we get tough with this kind of nonsense, then it will carry on.
Let's move to... I want to ask you about Donald Trump. You probably saw this. I mean, it's kind of funny, really, that he published a picture of himself being depicted as Jesus and then said that that's not true. It's a picture of me as a doctor. Now, I don't know how often you've utilised the NHS in the last number of years, Sarah. Like the rest of us, from time to time, you have to. I've never seen a doctor look like that.
Look, I really think this is a bit of nonsense. What's going on here? We've got POTUS v Pontifex. You've got there on your screen. It's ridiculous, really. Look, the fact is we've got global issues. We've got Trump. Clearly, he's got to decide his position and what he's going to do out there in the Strait of Hormuz. There are so many more bigger issues to worry about other than this spat between the two of them. I don't really want to comment on the Pope's line, other than it did seem very pro the Iranian regime. But look, the fact is that we need to maintain as good relations as possible with the United States. We are utterly defenseless as a country at the moment. This war is going on, and it is a war. And although we are not actively involved, partly because we can't be, we have no equipment to be involved. We cannot support the Americans out there in the Strait of Hormuz. We can't even get a ship out there, one single ship, as we know. But we have to maintain relationships with them. We are defenceless without them.
Defenceless in all sorts of ways. Defenceless to also guard our own borders. Yet again, it's another story courtesy of the Calais police. Standing around on the beaches, Sarah, watching people to leave the shores of northern France, headed for a shiny new life in the UK, courtesy of the taxpayer, of course. Their job, I thought, was to stop... Bearing in mind, it was only a week ago, 4 people died making that journey. You might have thought from a humanitarian position, if nothing else, whatever the legalities, that they would have stepped in. They didn't. They stood there, bucket and spade in hand, I'm sure, just watching them leave.
Look, yet again, we're watching boats arrive full of young fighting-age men from cultures quite different to our own. They are a threat to this country. I believe we should declare a national security emergency. We should deploy our navy into the Channel if we had a navy. I mean, can we even push these boats back? Never mind, never mind watching out for the Russian subs in our channel. I'm not even sure that we've got enough capability ability to turn around a few dinghies. But the point is, you know, yeah, the French are never going to help us. We're the laughing stock of Europe when it comes to our immigration policy. What we need to do is get our navy in the channel and turn these boats around.
But it's a grim day. The reading of this phase one of this report is, I mean, it's horrific from start to finish. I mean, we knew it was going to be, but it's very revealing. It's very thorough. I think that the chair of the inquiry has done an incredible job on this phase one. There's more to come, of course. But what he identifies there are very specific areas where you can point the finger. I think the parents are at the top of that list that he marks out, but there are other authorities. Prevent are in there as well. Now, whether it should have ever even got to a Prevent story is another issue. The fact is it did and was rejected 3 times. What is going on, Chris?
Well, he probably wasn't a terrorist. That's the issue with that situation. But what this shows up is actually the gap. And we've been saying this for years. Mental health, dealing with mental health and the mental health units are just not up to speed.
Yeah.
The police have been often left carrying the can for mental health inadequacies, and there are so many stories of people who are literally going mad on the street, have been taken into hospitals, sectioned, and then released pretty much immediately. Because there's not the resources, but also because they just don't want to deal with them.
A friend of mine who was in the Met like yourself, he said that you know what, depending on what shift he was on, anything after 4 o'clock was almost always going to be drug or drink related in some shape or form. But the common factor underpinning almost every arrest he made was some kind of mental health issue. Nobody really knows, he said, what to do. You know, you can take somebody to hospital. If they look as if they're going to harm themselves or others, then, you know, they may in extreme circumstances be sectioned, but that's not something that happens on every shift or by the hour, etc. There's not really, the joined up thinking that people talk about is hard to employ when nobody really knows. You know, I've got a person, if they technically committed a criminal offence, but underpinning it is, you know, clearly they're completely affected by some kind of psychosis as well. So what comes first, the criminal offence or the psychiatric breakdown? Where do we then go? Is that a hospital job? Is it the local authority? If they're of a certain age, is it social services? Is there a roadmap for this stuff? And if there isn't, there surely needs to be.
Yeah, well, there is a roadmap, but the trouble is that the services that are a part of that roadmap have had their funding taken away. You know, you may remember 30 odd years ago, there were hospitals, many mental health hospitals around the country. In Epsom, there were 2 or 3 that were there, and they were there to deal with people who've got these kind of issues. They've all been closed down. And of course, then you'll have heard of the care in the community, and then what goes next is the people that do the care in the community are then taken away because of a lack of funding. So you've now got a situation. I mean, every street, every main city centre that you go into in the UK now, you'll find people sleeping rough. Most of them have got some kind of a mental health issue that's not been dealt with, and these people are roaming our streets, and we're not doing anything about them.
And in order to do something about them, one would assume, in respect of this and other areas that, you know, come to light from time to time, the most harrowing examples, it requires arguably a total recalibration of how we do business as a country. The various institutions and establishments and authority areas, this needs a whole rewiring, doesn't it?
Yeah, but the point is the system was there previously. We've now got a situation where, as your friend says, at 4 o'clock every day, police officers are looking after people who've got mental health issues, and that's not their job. That's not what they were there to do. You know, the telephones 5 o'clock on a Friday night. You try getting hold of a mental health social worker, it's almost impossible. Yeah. So who has to deal with it? It's the police.
So
then
go on, Chris.
Police for not doing their job.
Yeah, exactly. So there is some. It's like we've got all the apparatus, but it's all in the wrong order, or it certainly needs more money funding into it. So, like, so mental health services should be 24/7, right? I mean, there's no closing for Christmas, but some of these helplines and even centres are not even open.
Yeah, but it all does come down to funding. I don't blame them themselves.
No,
for
of
this.
course. Yeah, I get
it's
that.
a situation where we've taken funding away from these things. We've taken funding away from mental health care. The hospitals have been closed, care in the community. I mean, I've been to houses where people were just literally taken out of mental health hospitals, and a group of them put into shared accommodation. And then one social worker was having a pop round every day or every other day to make sure they'd taken their medication. And then the people were missing. So then that spills out onto the streets. And the vast majority of mental health things that happen just aren't huge bits of violence like we've seen here and Calais up in Nottingham. They're not as bad as that. But they are destroying the fabric of society, because we've got these people roaming around who need help, who aren't getting the help they require.
So I mean, a cynic might argue, Chris, that actually that this isn't, what is happening isn't accidental in many respects, that the governments and the authorities have taken the path of least resistance. And the path of least resistance is oddly the chaos that you've just described. That is actually preferable than trying to deal with it, because to deal with it will cost several billions of pounds every single year. The number is growing because mental health cases are increasing. So strange as it might sound, the status quo, as we have now, is actually easier to deal with than trying to put it all back together again.
Yeah, it does require funding, and so does everything else. And the government are the arbiters of what they spend the money on. This is one of those things. You know, nothing will happen for 5 years. Things will happen, but they won't make the media like this tragic case has, and the one in Nottingham. You know, and suddenly it becomes top of their agenda. But we all know, Ian, that we've got problems on our streets with, as I said, people sleeping rough. If you speak to the charities, they will say almost every one of those has got some kind of a mental health issue that they need help with. And it's not as easy as just giving them somewhere to sleep. It really isn't. And we've got to spend on this kind of thing, and policing as well. You know, all these things require. If you want an ordered society, then you've got to pay for it.
And I guess, as you rightly say, Chris, not every, you know, most of these cases are not cases of something lethal or horrendous happening, but you only need that to happen once. And it's not unreasonable to suggest that all the while we retain the current position and the funding is lacking and the amount of resources that are needed are lacking, then the potential for another Southport or similar is all too real.
It is, and the sad thing about this, as we've seen many times, particularly in the terrorism field, but similar to this, is copycatting. And you know, I've just done some work with a number of schools who are really concerned that they're going to have someone come in to attack their children. So it's, you know, this, and of course the fear that goes through society, and it's not reasonable that we put up with this kind of level of violence, but we've got to do something about it, and we've got to fund those groups that are there to stop it from happening.
What I thought was really interesting on this tour is that somebody handed Meghan some flowers or something, and she immediately gave it to some sort of like lady-in-waiting character, as the Queen might do. You know, that's even Princess Anne doesn't do that. She just holds on to them, you know, and takes them home with her, sticks them in a vase. So they're making the most of this, Kinsey. That would be fair, wouldn't it?
They are. You know, it does conflict with one of the most famous images or videos of her after the Queen passed away, when they are doing the walkabout around Windsor. And, you know, a courtier tried to collect some of the flowers that Meghan had slowly been collecting, and she rejected that person, and she was criticized for that. So I don't know if she learned her lesson there and she's pivoted. But I have a scoop for you, Ian Collins.
Yes,
I'm hearing from Australia that today Meghan Markle is filming an episode of their Master Chef. I don't know what she can teach these people that they couldn't learn on Sesame Street after watching With Love, Meghan. But apparently she is spending some time there. I also understand that she's quietly announced that she's an investor in an app, like an influencer app, kind of like the Shop My page that she used to have, that she terminated shortly after launching it. And she's utilizing this app, this AI app, to shill the clothing that she's currently wearing on the Australian tour.
Wow.
So when people are sitting back asking, you know, what's the motive here? What's the ultimate objective? I feel like we're safe if we just continue to answer dollar signs. You know, it's money ultimately.
I would have thought, because she used to be an actress, of course. I don't know if you're familiar with this, but, you know, when it comes to soap operas and those kind of programmes, you know, America gave us Dallas and Dynasty, or Dynasty, as you guys called it, all of this stuff. We had Coronation Street and EastEnders. In Australia, they had a show, I think it's just coming to an end, if it's not ended already, called Neighbours. And this was huge, Kinsey. And if anybody should move into Ramsay Street, it's Meghan and Harry. I mean, they'd be perfect. I'd start watching.
You know, if it's good enough for Margot Robbie, Ian, it's good enough for Meghan Markle.
Yeah,
okay?
Who else was in there? Guy Pearce was.
Was it Kylie Minogue?
Kylie Minogue started in Neighbours.
Yeah.
There's a big. There's another one bigger than that, whose name escapes me. Jason Donovan was there. Big Aussie actor. Who is it? Charlie Rowley.
Brookside, Home and Away. They were all big Aussie things, weren't they?
Brookside?
Have I shown...
I think Brookside was set in Liverpool.
My lack of... close enough.
Close enough, yeah. Charlie on pop culture. Yeah. Let's do an hour on that. So, Kinsey, here's the thing. Prince Harry's opened up about his real struggles as being a father. Look, being a father has many facets to it. I understand that. I think most dads, their sense is a sense of duty to be able to look after their family. That's it. And you want your kids to do better than you did. That's broadly it. When it comes to that, on that specific point, Prince Harry, I mean, they got $80 million for the Netflix thing. I don't think he's got any struggles in that department.
Yeah, I mean, he said he started journaling during this time, started to see a therapist. He said that he would take Archie from Meghan, and he could sense that Archie could sense how stressed he was. And I guess he felt some guilt associated with that. But I just have a hard time hearing these two talk about parenting. They tend to contradict each other, I guess I should say they contradict their own actions, because they spend a lot of time in the United States talking about how we should all keep our children off social media. But anytime Meghan Markle has something to promote or sell, I get to see the back of Archie and Lily's heads on Instagram. So I don't really consider him an authority when it comes to the parenting space. Obviously, he's trying to be vulnerable. I guess we should celebrate that. But again, I'm so cynical about this, because at the end of the day, it's not a royal tour. These are not two working royals. These are two, commercially driven individuals. And I think that it's calculated that they tend to appear in spaces that Queen Elizabeth previously appeared at. They're trying to remind us of that royal proximity, the same way he did in Canada with the veterans. Here we saw them at the Children's Hospital that Queen Elizabeth had made an appearance at. And I think it's incredibly disrespectful, because I know you remember this, Ian. Queen Elizabeth specifically said no half in, half out. And what we're seeing is them bulldozing over King Charles and forcing this half in, half out. And he risks jeopardizing a very important mission at the end of April, when he's here in DC trying to basically mediate the chaos between Keir Starmer and President Trump. He risks distracting from that if he acknowledges these two. So they really are like a bull in a china shop and getting away with a lot right now.
Are they trying? Do you think they're trying to get back into the royal family? Is this like a show reel, as it were, for King Charles, that they can go, look, we can still do it? The crowd showed up, or some people showed up.
I don't think that they want to abide by the British royal family's standards, protocol, and rules, and they're just going to do everything on their own terms and, flog AI apps where you can buy Meghan Markle's ugly sweaters and make MasterChef appearances. I think that they are trying to do things on their own terms, and they're going to try to force the half in, half out. But I'm under the impression that if they continue to do so, Prince William will put the hammer down when he inevitably takes the throne.
Yeah, I think so. Sir Jacob Rees-Mogg, former Conservative government minister, of course. Jacob Rees-Mogg, good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
Nice to have you with us. I mean, just to point on what Lord Robertson said, I mean, this is a man that he might have started out back in the day as a daft old socialist, but he's become a voice to listen to in recent years. This is a Labour man attacking his own party. This is a man that served as Secretary of State to Defence, the top job in NATO, a man who literally wrote the report for this government just a year ago. That warning is more than a little disturbing.
Oh, it matters enormously, because Lord Robertson is a tribal Scottish Labour figure. He doesn't attack his own party. And I think you have to ask the question of whether he's been put up to do this, whether John Healey or possibly even Keir Starmer himself has asked Lord Robertson or implied to Lord Robertson that it wouldn't be unhelpful for this type of statement to be made. I think it's telling you something about the inner workings of the government as well as Lord Robertson's own personal view. And I think it shows the weakness of Sir Keir Starmer that he hasn't simply, as First Lord of the Treasury, said to the Second Lord, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, we need the money to fund defence properly, the world is dangerous, and you've got to do something about the burgeoning welfare budget, which is just out of control.
Why would Keir Starmer want him to make that speech? Surely it's a direct attack on Keir Starmer.
Because Number 10 seems to want increased defence spending and is being blocked by the Treasury. This seems, as so often, to be the dead hand of the Treasury stopping sensible policy decisions being made.
Well, I mean, on that point, it does seem that Rachel Reeves believes she has a sort of get-out-of-jail-free card now with what is happening in Iran. She made the point yesterday over there in Washington, suggesting, look, it's not our war, but it does affect us. This is going to be used for the rest of time, certainly for the rest of time that she's in the Treasury, I would imagine.
Yes, but nobody's actually going to believe her because she's whacked industry with higher costs, with national insurance charges, with increases in the minimum wage. This has led to higher unemployment. It's also led to higher inflation. This has led to higher borrowing costs. All of that is her fault. It's the creation of her economic policy. And then our dear old friend Ed Miliband is making our energy situation worse and worse by obdurately refusing more drilling in the North Sea, expansion in the North Sea, which Norway is doing in spades, and selling us the gas that we could be getting out very similar gas to, refusing to do fracking, which could provide us with trillions of cubic feet of gas, and having this mad obsession with net zero. So it's a made-in-government, made-in-Downing Street downturn.
Your response also from the IMF, Jacob. I mean, this is pretty grim reading. The forecast was already pretty grim to begin with, 1.3%. That's now been downgraded to 0.8%, behind every other major economy on planet Earth.
Yeah, I have to be careful about this because I think the IMF is a completely stupid body, almost as idiotic as the Office of Budget Responsibility.
It's a fair point.
And I have to be careful, therefore, I have to be careful not to cherry-pick its reports when they're saying something that I think is right. On this occasion, I think they are right, but I wouldn't take the IMF too seriously. It's a forecaster that is usually wrong. And what matters is fundamental economic reform in this country so that we can grow and we can boost productivity. And this means controlling immigration, which is part of the productivity problem, supply-side reforms, reform of energy policy is the biggest supply-side reform, but also repealing all the crazy employment laws that Labour's brought in. That means that people in their right mind wouldn't set up a new business in England anymore. That's what needs to be done, not particularly worrying about here today, gone tomorrow IMF reports.
Indeed. It's interesting you mentioned immigration there as well. I noticed today that there's a little bit of fanfare coming out of the Home Office as they're talking about how they've closed down migrant hotels are being closed down, which sort of rather leaves you with the idea of, wow, maybe they've actually played a blinder here, to coin a phrase. They've only gone and done it, they've sorted it out. But of course, they haven't. They've just moved people from one location to another location, which is arguably even worse than the first location.
You're absolutely right. It's basically a con that it's not the point of the hotels per se, it's the fact that we're housing all these people at very large cost. What we need to do is to remove them. And that's where the government was so stubborn in getting rid of the Rwanda scheme, which was beginning to work even before it had started. People were not coming to the UK, they were going to the Republic of Ireland. We need a scheme that removes people from this country the day or the day after they arrive, rather than housing them at vast cost to taxpayers, billions of pounds a year, whether it's in hotels or former army barracks.
Do you sense, I mean, you guys struggled with this as well, greatly. Nothing much happened then. The story continued to grow. It's now out of control. Nobody really seems to have a realistic answer. I mean, you have people sort of outsiders, if you like, from the major parties. Rupert Lowe would be an obvious example, who are advocating something much more robust, that literally remove people. Don't wait. Don't have another inquiry. Don't look for another report. Literally just remove people. Why can't that physically be done?
Well, we are a nation of laws, so if you want to do things, you have to pass laws in Parliament. That's how our system works, and you have to win elections to do it. You can't... The fundamental principle of the common law is that anything the government does has to have a legal basis. And this is really important and a vast protection for all of us. Otherwise, we would have arbitrary government, and they might decide they wanted to remove you or me. But you can do it. And we need to legislate to get rid of the Human Rights Act, pull out of the European Convention on Human Rights and of the Refugee Convention, take all their effects out of domestic law, overturn any judgments that relate to them. You could do that by a single act of Parliament, and then you can remove people. But the legal base has to come first, and once you've got the legal base, you have to have the backbone and the will to do it, and that's lacking. Well, both of those are lacking in this government.
I rather thought, Peter, after some people turned up in the high street at Epsom and then the riot police sort of almost out of nowhere showed up en masse, that at least yesterday afternoon wouldn't have to be the Chief Constable of Surrey Police, but the head honcho in Epsom would have said, right, I need to get this out there. We need to do a press conference, even if we genuinely don't have any information because the victim was unable to give it, whatever it happens to be. I need to put this on record and say it. But we've got an eerie silence coming out of Epsom today. Morning, Peter.
Good morning. Yeah, we certainly have. I think what we need to remind ourselves is that this crime is being reported as fact by the BBC and many other news outlets. There is no allegedly, there is no apparently about this crime. And that media reporting is based on what journalists are told by Surrey Police. So we can take it as an unshakable fact that this appalling gang rape took place. Now, if we move on from there, and it is now some days since that attack took place, nobody has been arrested, so the investigation is clearly ongoing. It would make absolute sense for the police to release descriptions of the attackers so that perhaps the public can help identify them and then they can be captured. And also, as a matter of public safety, the public can be warned about the possible, what these people look like, the clothing they wear, so on and so forth. But we're having nothing of it. Yet Surrey Police can turn out in their droves in full riot gear for when a few hundred people turn up to protest because they want to keep women safe.
And in terms of there not being any response from the police, look, we don't live in a country where we have a day-to-day commentary on every crime. This is a particularly brutal, very serious crime. But my sense on this, Peter, is that there's a tipping point with these things. And once you hit that tipping point where there is clear disquiet among the public and the locals, there is the potential for something to kick off. The anger has got to that stage. We were also told after Southport that going forward we will release details of suspects. Would it not be advisable for a police chief somewhere to come out, and even if they have to tell us, look, it's unusual, we literally don't have any descriptions. The victim was unable to supply those descriptions, and that could well be the case. But we need something from the police on this, Peter.
We certainly do. There's a raft of CCTV in Epsom, like there is just about everywhere in the UK. Surely there is CCTV footage of these attackers. But what the police are terrified of is it kicking off in the kind of way that it did after Southport. But actually, what they're doing by staying silent is only making matters worse. The police were issued with new guidelines after Southport about how they should communicate with the media and be more upfront and be more open. They're just trampling all over their own guidelines. They're increasing frustration. They're making people angry, and that is a very bad recipe.
I mean, we've seen some rather bizarre elements and facets to this labyrinthine story of Peter Mandelson. It was already still ongoing, and then suddenly this pops up yesterday. I mean, this is damning for the Prime Minister, whatever way you slice it.
Yes, that's right. Now, we knew that the Mandelson saga was going to drag on for some time, that there would be further releases of the so-called Peter Papers. What we were not expecting was this explosive revelation yesterday afternoon that the Foreign Office had overruled security vetting clearance in order that Peter Mandelson could assume the role of US ambassador. And it's believed that they did so in order to spare Keir Starmer's blushes, because the Prime Minister had already announced that Mandelson would be his man in Washington. Well, if they were trying to spare him humiliation, then they've not done so for a very long time. It was more of a stay of execution. And now, as you've said, the Prime Minister's position just looks untenable. A big problem facing Keir Starmer is that he has long considered himself and presented himself as a paragon of moral probity. He has always presented himself as a man of integrity, a decent man, somebody who adheres to the rules. And no one has demanded the resignation of other ministers with such alacrity if they have breached the ministerial code than Keir Starmer. You know, he led the calls for Nicola Sturgeon to resign if she'd been found guilty of giving an inaccurate account of her meeting with Alex Salmond to MSPs. You know, the following year, he repeatedly accused Boris Johnson of misleading Parliament over his knowledge and involvement in the Downing Street parties. He also said he expected Suella Braverman to resign in 2023 over a possible breach of the ministerial code. Yeah. So there's a pattern there. And you just wonder how on earth the Prime Minister believes that he can cling on. Now, yes, he's used Ollie Robbins, the Perm Sec at the Foreign Office, as his human shield this time, but he's running out of people to hide behind.
It does seem extraordinary that he wouldn't have known. I mean, the order of events of how these things work is not familiar territory to most of us. So he was given the job and then they did the security checks. Maybe that is just how it ordinarily works. They didn't say you've got the job pending security checks, but if anybody needed security checking, I would argue objectively, I would say it would be Peter Mandelson. You know, we know he's had his poker in all sorts of fires over the years, to coin a phrase, whether that's, you know, his job in the EU as a commissioner. He's known to have friends in all sorts of interesting places, whether it's Russia, China, and of course, more poignantly and more disturbingly, that of Jeffrey Epstein. Now, that information was already known. It did come up on the security check. Clearly, it wasn't that bit that he failed on, one would assume, because Starmer had told the House of Commons that he was aware of the Epstein connection being raised. Now, if that was the point where Ollie Robbins and others decided, oh, we won't tell him, yeah, he failed that bit, he went through that bit, but we're not going to tell him he failed it. I mean, if that is the case, there's either a group of very inept senior people like Ollie and others in the Foreign Office who don't trust the Prime Minister enough with that information, or they did tell him and the Prime Minister is lying to us. I mean, it's extraordinary the PM did not know about this when appointing a man into such a senior position, Annabelle.
Well, it does seem inconceivable. To your question over how common it is that the announcement is made before an individual has gone through security vetting, it does happen. It's unusual and it carries certain political risks, which brings us back to your point of what did they know and when? Yeah. And, you know, unfortunately, we don't have certainty of Ollie Robbins has fallen on his sword or been sacked. Because he was the person who decided to overrule the vetting service. We don't know if he did that what motivated him to do it. We don't even know which particular controversy meant that Mandelson failed in his vetting, and I suspect that we never will. So part of the problem is, you know, often it's the cover-up, not the crime, that brings politicians down, and they're covering up so much now that the public are going to struggle to trust a word that they come out and say. And to Darren Jones's comments this morning, you know, we've already had the Labour government laying into the security services for their supposed failures in this appointment. But what does that say to our enemies, particularly if it's not even true, if they are using that as a way to hide from their own failures? It's quite something that they're blaming the intelligence services. You know, what message do they think that they are projecting to the world about our security and our competence in keeping British citizens safe, and not least ensuring that we appoint the right person into the most coveted, important diplomatic role that exists?
Yeah.
So, you know, it's going to be an extremely difficult time for Keir Starmer. He, of course, is going to Paris today for discussions about how we reopen the Strait of Hormuz. But so once again, it's sort of never hear Keir, and he's going to be leaving his senior staffers to sort of deal with this fallout. But at some point, the Prime Minister is going to need to give a statement to the public explaining exactly what has happened here. And he's going to need to be contrite. Let's not forget how long it took him to actually apologise for the mistakes that were made even up until this controversy exploded in all of our inboxes yesterday afternoon.
Well, he's over there in France, apparently to help open the Straits of Hormuz, which just sounds ridiculous that he's going to do that. But the straits between Number 10 and the Foreign Office is the other one that needs opening, because it seems there's a right royal row now going on. Neither trust each other. I mean, this is an absolute mess, whatever way you slice it. And, of course, the other point, Annabelle, is that what we do know is that Keir Starmer knew about it this week. He says, these are his words, knew about it this week. So we can say probably on Monday he knew about it. Why did he not address the House of Commons as a matter of urgency to clarify what he knew?
I believe that he's now come out and said that he knew on Tuesday that that's what Number 10 are disclosing. You know, it's possible that he simply didn't want the scrutiny of the House of Commons. He can't possibly have believed that this wouldn't leak. I wonder whether he was concerned about facing Kemi Badenoch at PM's Qs. I mean, as it happens, he already had a pretty bruising 30 minutes on Wednesday lunchtime anyway, but it's just going to feed this idea that he's not being totally honest and open with the British public over what happened with this appointment. It was just such a catastrophic mistake. And the fact that he's come out and said that he wasn't aware, and Number 10 wasn't aware, and we were told that Morgan Sweeney wasn't aware, and Peter Mandelson apparently wasn't aware. We don't know if Ollie Robbins was aware. You know, you just wonder how this government is operating. It seems to have completely failed in some of its most basic functions.
Well, indeed. I mean,
it sounds completely dysfunctional, doesn't it?
Yeah, the best that Keir Starmer can hope for, really, is the accusation of heady ineptitude. But at worst, it goes to more nefarious and disturbing territory, like whether he misled Parliament, whether he did actually know. There's a lot of questions there. And, of course, it ultimately comes down to one more poignant point of discussion, Annabelle, and that is whether Keir Starmer can survive this.
I struggle to see how he can survive this now. You know, just a week ago, I think just yesterday, in fact, yesterday morning, there was a sort of consensus in Westminster that Keir Starmer would limp on past May, that he'd had quite a good war with the Iran conflict, that Labour challengers and plotters were concerned that it might seem reckless and irresponsible and opportunistic for them to strike whilst the conflict was ongoing. We know that there's that gap between the results of the May elections and Parliament returning, so MPs will be in their constituencies where it's more difficult for them to try to plot some sort of coup, and therefore it looked like he would survive at least for a few months, possibly into 2027. But now, speaking to members of the Labour Party, the backbenchers, they are in meltdown. Their jaws have just dropped to the floor. They cannot believe this latest development. And yes, you know, Keir Starmer will take Labour into the May elections, but after that, it's very difficult to see how he survives. Those are going to be really bruising, damaging results for the Labour Party.
Yeah, but on the plus side, Ed Miliband then becomes our Prime Minister, perhaps. So, you know, you can go into the weekend with that thought in your mind, Annabelle.